This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. So in the last class, what we did was we started talking about the different macroeconomic variables, right? And the way they enter into the PD estimates to make them forward looking. Because the IFRS 9 PD, as per definition, is a set of unbiased estimator for actual bad rates, right? So it should be forward looking, it should reflect the time value of money, and it should be a weighted average of all the and it should be a weighted average of across multiple scenarios, right? So in this regard, excuse me. So in this regard, what we wanted to talk about was we want to talk about the key macroeconomic variables which would impact the PD estimate. And when I talk about that, we talked about the gross national product. We talked about we talked about the GDP, right? But after that, so when once we talked about the GDP, we saw that when we generally look into the percentage changes or the rate of change in GDP. So GDP is a measure of all the economic activity across that are produced. So when we look into GDP, so GDP is the sum of all the economic activities which are generated within the economy, within the geographical boundaries of an economy, right? But one challenge with GDP is that it does not consider the net transfers from abroad. Now, if you want to have an actual idea about the income of the nation, it is the gross national product that we need to look at, right? So it is the gross national product which adjusts the GDP to the net transfers from abroad. And the moment that they do it, right, the moment that it is done, what we have over here is a set of is a more accurate measure of the income which is being generated within the or which has been generated by the resources of the economy within a given period of time, right? Because the GNP adjusts it to domestic, the transfers which are made by the domestic resources working abroad into the nation, as well as it adjusts it to the to the kind of foreign transfers which are made by the foreign resources working in India or within the geographical domains of the nation, and those amounts are transferred abroad, right? So what we have over here is we have the gross national product. So what we talk about is that the GNP is something which needs to be used as a measure of the income. Now, if the GNP of an economy actually goes up, right, the probability of default for the accounts is within the geographical domain should ideally go down, because an increase in the GNP implies an increase in the income generating capacity of the nation domestically, right? So that's where we came across the difference between GNP and GDP, right? Also, one very important thing that we came across was that it was not GDP or GNP which really mattered. It was not the nominal value which really mattered. It was the real value of GDP or GNP which mattered, or NNP which mattered. NNP stands for the net national product. So when I talk about the net national product, right, what I imply over here is the GNP adjusted to the depreciation. So the net national product is nothing but it is the GNP which is adjusted to depreciation. So this will give us a more clearer picture of the gross national, of the income which is being generated within the economy. So GNP plus minus. the depreciation is your net national product. Now, even this net national product is a function not only of the output but also of the prices, right? Hence, this we need to reach the real value of net national product. So, as a modeler, I would always look into its real value. So, I would put in the real NNP. So the real in the real NNP, what we are going to do it is NNP divided by the prices, which is nothing but the cost of price index, cost of living index, CPI, or the CLI, what however it works out. Okay, so as I was saying, so am I audible now? Okay, so as I was saying, that when the economy expands, right? So when an economy grows, your output in the economy increases with an increase in the income. Now, with an increase in the income, the demand on the economy increases. However, the supply in an economy does not increase to that extent. So it gradually increases. So if I say that your demand increases in a differential manner, your supply increases in a differencing manner. So it increases in discrete time period. And this lag between the two causes an excess demand. And this excess demand causes the prices in the economy to go up. And hence, when an economy grows, you get to see an inflationary economy in process, right? So so when you are developing this model or when we are trying to bring in the model, these two variables need to come in together. So you need to know that how is the output in the economy growing along with an increase in the CPI, right? Or along with an increase in the price levels. And when you compare these two, right, you can actually make out that way which is growing. Now, if it happens that the price level is growing faster than the output in the economy, then there is a kind of a challenge because then the nominal value that you get to see is mostly being driven by the prices. Hence, you need to adjust it for the changes in the prices. Thus, we would preferably considering the percentage movements in the real net national product, right? But however, most of the exercises we do consider GDP, but considering GDP has this potential challenge that we have discussed, and hence we believe that it is it's more important to use real NNP as or the real GNP as an index of growth in the economy, right? So this is the part that we had discussed up to in the last class. So in today's discussion, what we need to understand is the association that we'll have between GDP and CPI and what are the challenges what are the questions that we need to ask ourselves if we are to introduce this particular asset, or if we want to introduce this particular variable in I mean with the PD model, right? So what we need to do is we need to understand the association between CPI and GNP, and how is it that we can take care of this, and if we are incorporating these two variables into the model, what are the challenges that we'll get to face. So this is the part that we will be addressing in today's discussion. No, I was on mute. I just wanted some time for you guys to have look into it and get hold of it. Okay. So now, moving to the next part. So we have discussed two basic measures, right? Two basic macroeconomic variables. Now we'll come down with other macroeconomic variables as well, right? So let's kind of try to understand, some very key important factors that how are these macroeconomic variables working, what are these macroeconomic variables all about, how is it that a change in the lending rates would impact the macroeconomic variables, and how is it that this macroeconomic variables would create an impact on the default rates. So we need to kind of create that chain of events over here, right? I will not be complicating things much. So I'll be focusing mostly on the price levels and on the output, right? And from there, output interest rates, etc. And I'll try to, you know, kind of building the framework which will explain the impact of interest rates on default rates, right? So let's say suppose an interest rate increases. So what are the impacts that happen in the economy and how does it return back to the banking sector? So basically, I'll be talking about first, I'll be talking about a theoretical model, right? The theoretical framework. And once the theoretical framework is sorted, then we'll go to talk about the macroeconomic variables. Then we go to talk about the econometric or the modeling side of it, right? So what do is we'll first use these two variables that we have discussed over here. So from there, we'll go to talk about the macroeconomic variables in the model. From the macroeconomic variables in the model, we'll go to talk about that how is it that this model is created, or how is it that this model is being, so how is it that the modeling side would come into it, and what are the statistical methods that we would require to develop that model, right? So that's the approach that we are going to take in today's discussion. So let's start off by talking about the macro framework first. Now, if I talk, if I think about something very theoretical. Now, if you think about the economy, right, the economy broadly has two types of markets, right? One is called your product market, and the other is called your money market or your financial markets. Now, in this financial market, I'll just limit things to banks, right, and government bonds and the thing. So I'll not be bringing in the speculative stock markets into this framework. So let's start by talking about the product markets. So let's first start talking about the product markets. Now, in the product markets, now I'll be talking a bit about, I'll just deviate from banking and analytics, and I'll be talking about some basic economic models, right? So, so what I want to do is I want to develop the linkages between each of these modeling frameworks. That's product markets. So what is the product market over here? So when I talk about product markets, in the product market, we have a very basic concept of, you know, income equals to, or aggregate supply is equal to aggregate demand. Now, if a product market is to be in equilibrium, right, the aggregate supply is equal to, or should be identically equal to the aggregate demand. Now, what is the idea over here? The idea over here is that if an economy generates an income of 1,000 rupees, that 1,000 rupees gets disbursed into different channels within the economy, right? So that and assuming that people perform optimally, right? So they'll save amount some, they'll put in some, and they'll consume some. So in between, there would be nothing left out. So no one is actually putting out the money in cash and exporting it out of the economy. So whatever is going on within the confines of this particular economy. So this account is, or the amount of income that is being generated is being disbursed through multiple channels in the economy. So that is basically what the framework is. Let's say suppose if my industry, so if rupees 100 of income is generated, out of this some of it is going to the households in form of consumption expenditure, right? Because let's say at the end of the month when the economy is the end of the month when the salary is credited, some part of that output which is generated comes up to us as salaries. Some of them go to the bank, some of them go as investments, and there are some investments which come back as government expenditures. Let's say the end of the year you pay your tax in the month of April, the government initiates a government project, so that money that you had paid as a tax comes back in a different form. So the aggregate demand in an economy is comprised of three parts. Broadly, it is the consumption expenditure. Excuse me. Broadly, it comes in as the consumption expenditure, right? Now, on the other hand, the next thing that happens is you have your investment expenditures. Your investment expenditures. So, what are investment expenditures? Investment expenditures are investments which are made by the private sector into the economy. Now, how is the private sector making the investment? They are borrowing the funds from banks and they're investing it into the economy, right? So it is this investment which connects the aggregate demand or the product market to the money market, because the investment is dependent on the rate of interest R, right? And this R comes from the banks, and the bank is a part of your financial market or your money market, right? And the third source of expenditure in the economy is your government expenditure. Now, our focus is not much on the government expenditure. We are just concerned about how would the private sector or the firms be investing in the economy, right? So what we will do is we will consider this as given, and we'll fix an arbitrary value g bar. Now all I'm interested over here is to understand the investment. How is investment dependent on how is investment dependent on the rate of interest, right? On the rate of interest. Now, how do you think is generally investment dependent on the rate of interest? How should it be related ideally? What sort of a relationship should these two have? How should the investments be related to the rate of interest? Harish?
May yeah, hi Tanmay.
Yeah, please.
So actually, so bank has a lending side and a trading side, right? For banking book, I think when so what is the source of a bank to get money? Like so they source
No,
money from their
so
savings account,
yeah,
right? So they will
right,
have to pay rate of interest to us as well, right? And also they will use this money to
right,
for the lending. So to I think to manage the
right.
balances, I think they are correlated, right?
They are correlated. So what is the relationship between them? So if the rate of interest, right, goes up, how will
Mm.
that impact the investments in the economy?
So I think
How?
how banks earn money is the rate of interest that they give to the you know people who have
See,
invested their
don't
money in
don't
the bank.
just let me simplify it, right? Let's assume that the banks, just to make it simple, okay,
Mm.
assume that the banks operate on zero income, so they don't earn any interest income, so they just operate as a channelizer of fund, right? So what happens is
Mhm.
the people go into the bank, they put their money into the savings account, the bank charges a rate of interest, and when an entrepreneur or a business entity comes in and asks for a loan, what the bank does is the bank charges the same rate of interest and gives the money to them. So this is the work that the bank does, right?
Mm.
Then we'll generalize it to the interest differential as well. Yes. So now in this case, how do you think would the investment of an economy be impacted if the rate of interest in the economy goes up?
I think the rate of interest is generally correlated with the employment. If the people are employed, and then maybe they will be able to lend more money or deposit more money with the bank, and
No,
based
no,
on
no, no,
that,
no,
the
no.
interest
It's
rate.
not that what no, no, uh-huh. No, it's not how the interest rate goes up. I'm saying the interest rate in the economy rises, right? Following
Mm.
this, what will be the impact on the investments?
The interest rates. I'm not sure.
See, it's very simple. Okay, it's very simple. So you can go on mute. Harish, Pradeep, anyone want to take a shot? Okay, it's very simple. See, the rate of interest. So imagine that I am a person who wants to start a business, right? So I'll go to the bank with my proposal and ask for fund. Now, from where will the bank get the funds? The bank will get the funds from the savings account or from the deposits which the people keep in the bank, right? And then the bank will lend that money out. Now, when the bank does this, now if the bank has to give a higher rate of interest to the depositors, they'll also charge a higher rate of interest to these people, to the borrowers. Hence, the cost of borrowing the funds will go up. Hence, my interest cost will go up, and hence the amount of funds that I'll demand from the bank or the amount of funds that I'll take from the bank will be lower. Therefore, when the interest rate of interest goes up, the cost of borrowing the funds go up, and hence the investment in the economy goes down. This is precisely what happens when RBI changes its repo rates. So when RBI changes the repo rate, the rate at which the bank borrows from the RBI increases. So RBI, the banks, they pass down that increased loan to that increased amount to the borrower. Now, to keep that differential intact, right? And hence the lending rates then go up. When the lending rates go up, the amount of funds that you borrow from the bank will actually also go down, and hence the amount of liquid money in the economy goes down, right? And this is one of the most important inflation control measure that that any central bank in the world uses, especially RBI. So when the monetary policy comes out, you would often hear that the governor says that, or rather, at one point of time, the governor used to say that the monetary policy has increased by so many basis points and so on, right? So this is something. This is how the rate of interest and the investments in an economy are kind of related. So when you want to boost up the investments or boost up the expenditures in your economy, what the central bank does is central bank cuts down the rate of interest. So if you just go back to 2008, just not 2008 but 2001 and 2, immediately after this World Trade Center attack happened in US entered into a terrible recession. So at that point of time, the loans on the interest rate and consumption loans were cut down to 1% directly from where they were. Now, when it was cut down to 1%, the rate of interest fell, and hence consumption loans became very cheap. So people used to borrow from the bank and use those loans to boost up the consumption, and that is the way US led itself to consumption-led growth. But it was a different story that the subprime crisis, the subprime bubble started building. So, the basic relationship between the rate of interest and investment is that the moment the rate of interest goes up, right, the lending rates go up, the investment in the economy would fall. So if I
So,
write it
uh,
in a simple, Mhm.
sorry,
Yeah,
Tanmay,
Pradeep, please tell me.
just one point. So when the inflation rates are high, any central bank would raise the interest rate to bring it down, and in doing so, it makes
Correct.
borrowing expensive. So basically, what happens is the small and medium-sized businesses in the economy, which are the major employment generators, they would be able to
Mhm.
borrow
Mhm.
less and invest less in their business, which after 2 or 3 quarters would in fact go and affect the
Right.
employment rate as well. So it's like a vicious circle. uh, Raising interest rate would actually make borrowing
No,
expensive.
see, over there, there is a trade-off.
Hello.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
there is a trade-off. So, and this is actually called the inflation unemployment trade-off, right?
Mm,
So
mhm,
the role of the central bank, so that is where the role of a central bank in an economy comes up, where the central bank intervenes and it lays out its priorities. So when it sees that the output is falling and the unemployment is increasing in the small and medium scale enterprises, what they do is that is where they have certain support programs to ensure that that there may be differential lending rates across based on the priority of the sector, right? Let's say, for
mhm,
example, there is a handicraft industry which employs 80% of the overall population. Now, there's an inflation which is coming out, or the inflation which is being generated because of some other different reasons. Let's say there is a whole startup boom in India, right? And these startups are generating huge amount of wealth, and there is a sudden increase in the disposable income of a certain group of people, to the venture capitalists, to the co-founders, to the people who are working in the high skill startups. So when they are working it like this, what happens is that the overall expenditure pattern in the economy starts shifting, and then you just cut down your interest rate. But the impact is not mostly on these people, because the source from where they get the funds is very different. So it hits the other
mhm.
sector, say it hits the handicraft sector. So
Yeah.
now what the RBI does is the RBI sees that okay, unemployment is generating from that side. So what we'll do is we will do some kind of a differential lending, right? And that is the purpose with which these rural banks are created. These specialized lending institutions are created. NBFCs are created who lends only to these industries. So when the RBI gives the loan, it would be having its own differential policies stating that when if you are lending to Standard Chartered, or you are lending to HSBC, or you are lending to some other, if you're lending to a Walmart or to a Flipkart, you will do it in a different way. Whereas if you are doing it to a regional handicraft farm, you will have a different rate of interest, or you lend to NABARD, you will do it in a different way. So there are these differential policies, right? So which is not always, yes, obviously interest rate rises hits the SMEs very hard, right? So the RBI has to take different control measures to control the unemployment that is being generated from there. But at the same time, it also has the constraint to pull down the overall extent of liquid funds. Now, let's say the manufacturing sector is generating the majority of the funds. What they do is they start giving shocks to the interest rates in those segments. Right now, in a real-time economy, it's a very partitioned kind of a policy, and it's not one single policy which is there present in an economy like India, right? But on the whole, I am saying from an economic perspective, from a modeler's perspective, if the rate of interest goes up, the investment will go down. Yes, which will lead to an unemployment in the next few quarters, which needs to be again managed accordingly.
Okay, yeah.
So when we come to unemployment, right, I'll be talking something about something called the Phillips curve, right? So basically, as we say, a policy maker generally chooses an unemployment and an inflation rate from a Phillips curve. So I'll talk about what a Phillips curve is, right? So, and why is it that we should not incorporate inflation and unemployment together? So there will be a whole set of analysis supporting that as well. So just let's first understand the dynamics, and then we'll just come to it.
Sure.
Right? Pradeep, clear? Is the approach clear?
Yeah. Sure. Thanks. Can you hear me? Hello?
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah. Harish, Piyush, any questions, any queries that you would like to ask in this respect?
No.
Okay, thanks, man. Let's continue. Okay, so as I was saying, so when the interest rate goes up, right, the investments in the economy will generally go down. Now, the second head that we have over here is the consumption expenditure. Now, consumption expenditure is a function of the GNP, or the income which is generated within the economy. And we assume that both these consumption expenditures and investments are proportionately related to the respective explanatory variables. So we generally say that it is A plus some B into Y. Right? And over here, what you have is this investment function will be something like this. Investment is some function of an autonomous investment minus uh, some C into R. So C is the responsiveness of investment to a change in the rate of interest, right? So every time the rate of interest increases by 1, right, the I bar generally goes down by, I mean, the investment goes down by C units. Right? So Okay, so there is this part, right? Now, let's look into something over here. Now, if the investment, if the bank is so if the bank is so if the bank the rate of interest is higher, right, or if the interest rate increases, there would be an impact on the consumption function. Why? Because the consumption function talks about the amount of income, which is used in consumption. So obviously, if some amount of the income is being consumed, then a certain part of the income will also be saved. So there is a corresponding savings which is involved here. So there is a savings function, right? So is savings is a function of the rate of interest, right? Now, while rate of interest goes up, I would be more interested to keep a larger volume of my savings in the bank account. Whereas over here, the investment would be, or the investment, whereas investment is negatively related, right? Savings will be positively related to my, to the rate of interest. So now, by looking into this, so once the rate of interest increases, there will be an impact on the savings and there would be an impact on the investment. So the question that comes out over here is that how will this impact be like? So let's have a look into this graph. So how would the graph be looking like? So this is your dependent variable. 0. So over here, what I'll have is the output y, right? And over here, what we'll have is the rate of interest r. So this is output y. This is the output, and this is the rate of interest. The rate of interest. Rate of interest. Now, how would your investment graph look like? So obviously, over here, what we'll get is a set of savings and investment and a rate of interest, right? And you will get an equilibrium rate of interest over here. Because over here, the interest and the savings are both the function of the, or investment and saving is a function of the rate of interest. So basically, this will be the rate of interest over here. This is where I have 0, this is R, and this is savings and the investment. So now, first of all, this is your investment graph, IR. So as the rate of interest increases, your investment graph goes down, right? Now, similarly, what you will have over here is you will have the savings graph, that is SR, right? So obviously this is understood that as the rate of interest increases, right? So households will be more motivated to save their money, right, and put out a greater amount on the savings. Whereas as the interest rate increases, the investments in the economy will gradually start going down, right? And the point where these two interact together will be your savings and investment. That is R0, and this is your equilibrium value of savings and investment, right? Now let's say that the savings in an economy increases, right? Now why is the savings of an economy increasing? The savings of an economy is increasing because the rate of interest in the economy has increased. So this is where the increased graph comes out. This is S R dashed, right? So now when the economy's savings increases, you can see something else. Now this is where your rate of your rate of interest has increased. This is R1, and this is where your sorry, I have messed up the axis is one second. Just a moment. This is the output S0, S1, and this is the rate of interest. R, right? So over here, Just give me a moment. Just give me a moment. I'm suddenly confused of the graph. Just a moment. So this is your y-axis, your x-axis. So this is your R, and this is your S, savings and investment. So first of all, this is the investment graph, I, which is a function of R. And this is the savings graph, which is also a function of R. Right? And over here, what we have is, so what we have over here is this one. So S0, right? So there is S0 and R0. So this is where the economy is. So you have the rate of interest over here, and you have the equilibrium rate of interest, and what you also have is the equilibrium savings, right? Now, let's say that due to the government intervention, right, the government intervenes and to some monetary policy exercises, the rate of interest increases. And we want to understand what would be the impact on the savings and the investment for this particular organization. So what happens is my rate of interest increases at R1. So it increases from S0 to R1. Now, obviously, when the so when the amount of funds increase, right? So what will happen is when the rate of interest increases, people will start. So there will be an excess demand for savings. So or there would be an excess of savings in this case, right? Or there would be an excess supply of funds. Now, with this case, so over here, this is case where you have an excess supply. So more and more people will start buying this. excess supply. So over here, so what you will get to see is that, so now there is an excess supply of this thing. So at this rate of interest, so the banks will be willing to now offer lesser and lesser amount of interest to these people, because at this investment and at this supply, there is a much more supply of funds, and there are more funds in the banks that the banks can lend out, and hence they will be willing to offer lower rates of interest. And hence what you can see is that again the rate of interest will revert back to this point. So this shows that this equilibrium that we have over here is a pretty stable equilibrium. Now, let's say due to some sort of a scheme or something that happens, the savings in the bank shifts, right? Now, with the increase in the savings curve, or with an increase in the savings, the rate of interest will gradually increase. So when the thing gradually increases, so you will see that with an increase in the cost of borrowing, banks are lending out lower amount of funds, or lower amount of, the banks are willing to lend out lower amount of funds, and the equilibrium will happen at F1, whereas the previous equilibrium happened at a higher value F0. So what happens is that so if there is an increase in the savings tendency of the economy, right, when people start saving up more and more, the investment in an economy gradually goes down, right? And hence, and if this successive rounds of this thing keeps on continuing, you will see that the overall productive capacity in the economy will go down, right? And when the overall economic activity goes down, the economy gradually exposed a downturn accompanied with an increase in the unemployment rate, and hence there would be, in the long run it would result, or after some period of time it would result in an increase in the default rates, because the the earning capacity of the people would gradually start going down, and that is where this challenge will actually arise. Hence an economy which always has a high lending rate of interest, because whenever the lending rates are very high in an economy, right, so what we try to do is we try to put it down. So when interest rates are kind of upward bias, or they are northward tending, the banks or the central bank takes policies to reduce the rate of interest, because to boost up the economic activity, right? And this precisely the exercise that you see over here, where there is a sudden increase in the savings. With an increase in the savings, the rate of interest also increases with the bank, right? Because the banks know that, okay, as more number of people are keeping more money, we have more investable funds which we can invest to the entrepreneurs, right? And we can, since we are giving out more as interest income, we'll charge more to the entrepreneurs, and then what happens is the demand for funds starts drawing down, right? And the investments actually fall. So this is actually a paradox that an economy has, that too much of savings in an economy, it can lead to a paradox of thrift. So if you are a very thrifty economy, where you are trying to save out a lot of your funds, you would end up with an increase in the default rate. So you would end up with the economy moving into a downturn, right? Because your investments in an economy will gradually keep on going down over a period of time, and then you would end up with a lower amount of figures. So you would end up with a lower amount of output and an increased unemployment. And if this happens, then you are into a paradox of thrift, right? So this is a very famous paradox that every recessionary economy faces, that either, so if you are an economy which is trying to save out a lot, right, in that way you kill subsequent rounds of investments, and ultimately your output starts drying down and you start entering into a downturn. So again, whenever as a policymaker you are making a policy, you need to know that the rate of interest should not be very high, right? Now imagine a situation where your rates of interests are high, right? Now what will happen from nothing from the bank's perspective, right? Now when the rate of interest is very high, your cost of borrowing, cost of lending is high, correct? If your cost of lending is high, then borrowers who come to you to ask money would generally be bad borrowers. Why? Because people who are really worried about paying back the loan, not defaulting in the future, they would gradually move out of the lending circle. And borrowers who are very casual about, who are indifferent between paying back the loan and not paying it back, will step into the circle, and then into the lending circle, because they know that we'll take the money now. If downturn comes, we just get off it, right? We just put our hands up and the banks, and let the banks deal with it. So when your economy is ending, if you go into a downturn, right, due to so very maintaining very high rates of interest to bring in savings into your banks, right, or make your bank cash adequate, or flooded with cash, also has its own challenges. It leads to a downturn in the subsequent runs. Also, the portfolio of borrowers who are coming up to you are actually very derogatory in nature, right? In order to prevent the second problem, which is more towards a microeconomic problem for the banks, right, where you are looking to the borrower, you have your scorecards in place, right? But if you maintain a very high rate of interest for each borrower, for all the borrowers, a unique high rate of interest, then you are sure to end up with uh, some kind of an adverse selection problem. Hence, that is where the concept of risk-based pricing actually comes in, right? So that is where we talk about risk-based pricing. That is where we talk about all these kind of pricing models which help you price the borrowers according to the riskiness that is there, right? And that is where your application scorecards come in. So everything in the economy is kind of related. So an increase in the interest rate today, or maintaining a very high rate of interest today and over a substantial period of time, would ultimately lead to the default rates in your economy going up. Clear? So is this linkage clear to us? Right? Okay, so this is how. So one thing you can see over here is that the rate of interest, the output, the prices. So these are all related with each other, right? And an increase in one of these uh, metrics or one of these factors would create a whole set of chain movements, resulting in certain impacts on the default rates. And so the entire idea of macroeconomic modeling around this part would involve capturing the impact of the most appropriate variables in framing that, or in reaching to that relationship between the default rates and the key macroeconomic variables, right? So these are the two most important macroeconomic variables that we have looked into, right? So the next set of important macroeconomic variables that we will look into will be your unemployment rate, right? So let's stop here for the day, right? Let me share the recordings with you today, right? So I need some time to do that, go through it, just come up to speed because this is a very complicated portion. In the next week, we'll introduce unemployment rate, right? And we'll talk about how can this be modeled in an econometric framework. So how is it that I will actually model this part? What will be the steps, the framework, like we had done for scorecard development in CRM? We'll talk about a modeling framework over here because the 12 months PD model that you are developing, point in time PD model, is similar to how you develop the scorecard. Over here, we'll focus more on how would you develop this macroeconomic model with the PD, point in time PD, to make it forward looking. So this is how we are just going to do it, right? So I'll share this recording. I'll share all the other recording, the links to the recording rather, and then from there you can take it up. So just go through all the recordings that are there, right? And from there we will try to take up the next steps, right? So have a great weekend, guys. Let's meet next week. Okay, next Saturday we start from 8:30 a.m. with risk modeling. We'll do it till 11, right? I'll take a half an hour break. From 11 to 1, we'll continue with risk modeling, right? So Saturday we generally have one session. We'll just have two sessions to complete the lab that I have today. Next Sunday we'll have 8:30 to 11, and then we'll have from 11:30 to like we generally have. Clear?
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, guys. Thanks a lot.